Hi everyone, my name is Chris Warren. I'm a pastor in the Murfreesboro Presbytery, and this is my ally story. I attended middle and high school mostly in the 1980s. Now for those of you who are old enough to remember that, you probably know that that was not a very accepting time for people who were anything other than exclusively heterosexual. In fact, using words to describe homosexuality was a common insult in the schools I attended during that time. There wasn't really any pushback. I lived in a medium-sized town in Tennessee. Just like everybody else, I wanted to fit in with my classmates, and it was clear that anything that might make one appear or be suspected of being anything other than heterosexual was not acceptable. I learned to internalize that type of judgment. Until I went to college, I didn't really question that judgment. Now for undergrad, I double majored in music and theater. As you might imagine, I was quickly exposed to a lot of people who were very different from me. That included people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people of different ethnicities, and it also included people who were not exclusively heterosexual. It was still a pretty cautious time for many because coming out of the closet in that time could mean ridicule and isolation. But some of my friends were bold enough to share their sexuality with me. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. I had absorbed the cultural understanding that anything besides heterosexual was shameful and sinful. As I reflect on it, interestingly, I don't think that I got that really from a religious background that I had, even though I was a religious kid. Instead, I took what I learned in the culture of the school and I assumed that it was confirmed by religion and the Bible. And then later, when I was older and I found a few passages in the Bible that were judgmental on this issue, I thought that's the only word that the Bible could have on this topic. But the thing was, the people who I knew who weren't exclusively heterosexual, they became my real friends. I spent time with them every day. I learned about their hopes and fears for the future, and they were just the same as mine. I discovered that we're all human. All of us are doing the best we can to be the people we're called to be. Some of my friends were religious. Others were skeptical of religion. Some were actually non-religious because of the way that religion had been used as a weapon against them in the past. I found, though, that I loved my friends, that they were very much like me, that there was no reason to judge them harshly. I learned that for many, like me, the attractions they had started early in life, long before they would ever dream of choosing who they were attracted to. And so I wondered about this. On one hand, religion and culture seemed to be saying one thing, but on the other hand, my heart was saying something different. I couldn't imagine God being disappointed in someone because of their natural attractions. I believe that God made all people, and if God had made people to love in a way different than I do, well, it couldn't be inherently bad. I didn't think God had made mistakes with people, so I concluded somehow God must accept people of different types of sexuality. But I didn't understand how to think about it very well until I went to divinity school and learned some things about the Bible itself. For one thing, I learned how the Bible came to be. Over the course of thousands of years, stories were told about how to be God's people. I learned that those stories sometimes contradict one another. I learned that the culture of the time that the Bible was written was very different than our modern culture. And I learned that words that meant one thing in the Bible could be interpreted or translated to mean or suggest meaning something different in our modern day. And I learned there are over 600 laws in the Old Testament. And even for the religious, there seem to be exceptions to almost all of them, the Ten Commandments included. But many think there's no exception to that one rule about one man lying with another man. I mean, most of those laws we don't even claim anymore. But because of culture, some stick ardently to that one. I learned that sexuality was more complicated in the culture of the Bible than we're used to thinking of. And many times things we have interpreted as homosexual activity in Scripture could be talking about temple prostitution, orgies, or pederasty. I learned that the Bible is probably never indicating what we would consider a modern homosexual relationship of equality between two people, when that subject is mentioned, it's instead talking about sex as a means of power. I learned how to understand the Bible differently, and that's when my understanding of God's love for all people became better focused. God does love all people, and I am called to love people in the way God does. I'm not very good at it, but I am trying. One thing I think I can do is love all people made in God's image and love them for the way they are made. That's hard for us on a good day, but I think it's what it means to be faithful. And loving those who are not exclusively heterosexual is part of that love. Accepting those who are not exclusively heterosexual is part of God's call on our lives. For me, I started fearful of those who were different. Then I came to know many who became friends. That broke the stranglehold culture had on my understanding of those who are not exclusively heterosexual. And then time and better understanding of how Scripture came to be gave me the opportunity to bring back together my love and compassion for fellow humans and my understanding of God's love and the role of religion in our sexuality. Now, I believe God made different people to love one another, and none of us are exactly the same. When two people mutually love one another, and they express that love to one another, as long as it's not in a situation of power, I believe God sees that love and sees that that love is good. I believe relationships of all kinds can be negative if love is not at the source, but that loving, mutual relationships are blessed by God. And I believe that we are all meant to love and respect one another through our differences, whatever those differences may be. Churches sometimes made mistakes in the past. I think if we're trying to exclude a group of people who are devoted to Christ, who are offering themselves to the church, I think it would be a big mistake that we'd be making today to turn them away. We must do better than teaching our young people they're not acceptable to God because of the way they were made. We must do better than telling people that God finds them abhorrent when God created them the way they are in the first place. If you are anti-inclusion of our LGBTQ plus friends, I'd suggest a humble conversation with someone who is in that community. Now, please only do this if they're comfortable and if you are willing to hear their story with empathy instead of judgment. I think if you have that opportunity, you will see the shared humanity in all of us and the love God has for all humans. I pray it may be so for our church. God bless you.